they allowed jazz to openly identify in the opposite gender.
Did they allow jazz to openly identify, or did they push jazz to openly identify in that direction because jazz was a small child? A very...
Yeah, like in what world is it parents who are suddenly doing this thing in order to get the social media clout they themselves want? Yeah, I really wanted to be a TikTok star, and I knew the best course to do that would be have a trans kid. So yeah, I forced my kid to transition against their will. Definitely wasn't in the opposite direction than them asking me frequently, hey, by the way, this is something to me not believing them for a very long time and me pushing up against it.
Well, folks, Jazz Jennings is a very, very famous transgender person. In fact, Jazz Jennings is the face of the transgender movement beginning at about the age of 4 years old. Jazz Jennings' story is one of the saddest stories you will ever hear, and it really rips the mask off the evils of the transgender propaganda movement. So yesterday, the Washington Post started pushing around this article called Trans in America. They gave a survey. The Washington Post and KFF surveyed one of the largest randomized samples of U.S. transgender adults to date about their childhoods, feelings, and lives. And here was their headline. Most trans adults say transitioning made them more satisfied with their lives. Most people who believe they are Napoleon believe that buying a Napoleon costume was good for them. Breaking news. It turns out that most people who identify in a certain way are very happy with the life choices they have made to identify.
Whoa. So you don't even have this one anymore? Like you're acknowledging the science finally that, yeah, there's an incredibly low rate of detransition, and of the people who detransition, the less than 5%, it's typically because of societal stigma is the reason that they report why they do that. So now it's, well, yeah, but they're all insane. They're all insane people, and we're basically giving into their insanity. We're helping their insanity. That's what we're doing. What? So here's how you can dispel or disprove and this one goes hand in hand with the amputation argument, because I've heard also right-wingers be like, well, if someone wanted to amputate their arms, if they had a condition where they decided they have to, and there is conditions in which people can have those kinds of delusions. If someone wanted to amputate their arms, would you do that? Is it ethical for you to do that, even though you know they would be armless? And you'd have to be like, well, if there was something in which science regarded that someone's outcomes are going to be a net benefit to them by undergoing a certain procedure, and that procedure happens to be the amputation of their arms, and then afterwards they can both do long-term studies on the effects of and positivity that it's having with individuals in question versus alternatives to this strategy. So is there alternatives to amputating someone's arms, such as various forms of therapy that will work and convince someone to stop wanting to have their arms be amputated because it would be a very unhealthy thing for them? And if they do that, can we look at the stats? How many people going through this procedure? Because I think universally you can accept that there's probably no studies. I mean, I could be wrong on this. I'm willing to be corrected, but there's no studies that show that if someone has had their arms amputated, that they have more positive outcomes in life, in broadly speaking, all categories. It improves their mental health. It improves their ability to engage publicly with other individuals. It improves, like, across the board, you'd be able to find that, and we do not have that because, again, this is not a procedure that doctors, I believe, as far as I know, could be wrong, I haven't done a lot of research on people who want double arm amputation simply because they have a mental condition that is provoking them to do that. But in the case of trans people, trans kids, and gender-affirming care, there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that it can be beneficial, life-saving, and generally good for their well-being. And again, gender-affirming care changes over time. It's not you walk into a doctor's office and you could be a 5-year-old and you get a mastectomy. It's definitely not that. And we also don't care about gender-affirming care when cis people do it. There's been no crusades for over half, I think, of all dudes in the US are circumcised. Over half. There's hundreds of thousands of cosmetic procedures done on teenagers yearly. About almost 5,000 breast implants are done on teenagers, but there's about 230,000 cosmetic surgeries that include nose jobs, skin grafts, tattoo removals, all those kind of things. There are tons and tons of women who get mastectomies, teenage women who get mastectomies because their breasts are too large, because it hurts, because it gives them back problems. One of my best friends in high school underwent that. She was much happier afterwards. There's boys who get mastectomies because they have conditions like gyno where they don't want to have, and it's giving them gender dysphoria to be growing breasts, and they don't want to have breasts, so they have mastectomies to get rid of that. And again, in all those cases, no one's saying, hey, this is mutilation. Hey, all of you, you're brutally mutilating all of these people. No one even spoke about it. No one brought it up once. You know, none of these people brought this up. And yet when it's with trans people, well, then it's a cause.
In that way. That is not news. This is the worst form of social science data. It is a self-reported survey with no control group. That is crap data. Because, for example, this was pushed out by the Washington Post as evidence that no one detransitions, that people don't actually decide that they've made a bad mistake, except that no one who has detransitioned now considers themselves trans, so they would not actually be included in the survey. There's no actual control group. Also not included in the survey, anyone who may have suffered from any gender confusion at any level when they were a kid but does not identify as trans now. So if the argument is that kids don't desist from being trans, that there is no desistance, that kids who are 5 and say they are gender confused always end up going through surgeries and then being happy trans adults or whatever.
Yes, that
if
is
that
what
were
the
actually
data
the
shows.
case, you would have to somehow track down and figure out who suffered from gender dysphoria at the age of 6, but didn't decide to become a full-blown trans.
That's not how come on, Ben, you're the cool kids philosopher. You should understand this. There's no way to effectively sample size every single trans person. There's no way to effectively sample size all, 7.8 billion human beings on the planet to find out, hey, you don't get to discount one survey because there hasn't been enough people in the opposite direction surveyed. What you need to do is you need to take multiple studies, multiple tests, and hey, combine them with the same studies that are being done globally in order to get and paint a better picture of something that is a phenomenon that is not happening uniquely in the West, but is happening throughout human history. We now know that trans people have always existed. They've always been a part of the human experience. So, hey, if there's now the technology available for them to have things like gender affirming care, do we have studies that show what the effects will be on the people who undergo it? And that's how you basically learn from this. You take lots of those studies, combine them into metadata, and then at that point we can get a much clearer picture. And that's how it's like any other medical procedure. You want the best possible outcomes. Everyone does, right? If you take a Tylenol, some people can have a negative consequence of that and it can kill them. If you take the wrong amount, like Viagra can kill you. Viagra, it's like, hey, what do you want this to do? Well, I want to achieve erections for large periods of time. Okay, well, this is a pill that can do that. It could also kill you. You could have a cardiac arrest and die. This is a potential side effect from Viagra. Most people don't. On average, most people who take it within a certain age range and within certain conditions and have healthy hearts and everything, on average, are probably going to be able to undergo an experience of taking Viagra, achieving an erection, having a fulfilling sexual experience, and then eventually the erection will subdue. That's something that happens to most people. But there are some people who, if they take Viagra, they could die. So that is a real thing. So you don't go after anyone who wants to take Viagra, though. You start looking at, like, well, statistically, what's the danger? What's the over-under? Is it more important? There's going to be a risk, obviously, at me doing this. The risk is potential cardiac arrest, but I'm pretty healthy. I think it's going to be fine. We should be okay.
Gender person at the age of 20. But that's not included in the survey. So it's just bad data in, bad data out. By the way, even this bad data in demonstrates extraordinary levels of high depression and depression, suicidal ideation, and all of the rest in the self-reported community. But the idea here is that everybody is very...
Yes, of course. But they explain why. In those same studies, they'll explain that the largest cause of a lot of that is societal pressure. People like you, people pushing the shit out there. That's what causes a lot of it. That's what causes the high rates of suicidal ideation, the high rates of depression, anxiety. And of course, do you remember what it was like to be a teenager, Ben? It's like, it's brutal. It sucks. You're constantly worried, afraid, scared. And that's if you're like 100% on paper, the thing that no one makes fun of you for. If you're straight, white, cis, all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, and you might have an easier high school experience, depends on where you are and what's going on. But if you add, hey, you're queer into that, you also happen to be gay, you also happen to be trans, you also happen to be asexual, doesn't matter what it is, well then you're going to have a much even harder experience in addition to anything that's already happening.
Happy once they transitioned, which is strange because this seems like, by the survey data, not a particularly happy group. But again, this is all pushed by the media to suggest that transgenderism is an inherent biological identity and that trans people are in fact the sex of their new choosing. And that the only way to pursue the trans agenda is to teach everyone in America that sex is not dichotomous. It is, in fact, fluid and changeable. Now, the poster child for this, and this is truly one of the saddest stories I've ever seen.
You're confusing a lot of different things here, though, Ben. Are you talking about sex? Are you talking about the sexes? Are you talking about sexuality? Because, again, in all those categories, yes, we are discovering new things as we go along, but the category of intersex, which he loves to dispel, does throw the entire concept of there being just two sexes into question. Also, the idea of identifying people based on either chromosome combinations, genitals, hormones, all that kind of stuff. We're realizing more and more as we gather new information about that does not allow us to paint a complete picture. We have people who are born who have male genetics. If you were to test their DNA, they would show up as a man on paper, but because they were intersex and had surgery and didn't even know about it at a very young age, are completely, in every way, shape, or form, a woman. They identify as a woman. They she, her. They present as a woman. They biologically would seem as a woman in every single way, but on a genetic level, they're technically male. This is a condition that can happen, and it's real, and just the fact that it exists doesn't mean that all of a sudden we get to discount the very existence of intersex people, other sexes. It's just one of those things where, like, it just makes everything so much more interesting, you know?
It really is a horrifyingly sad story. So there's a person named Jazz Jennings. Jazz Jennings was the star of a show, still is the star of a show called I Am Jazz. And I Am Jazz, this person was born in 2000. This person is a boy, and was transitioned by his parents when he was a very, very young kid. At 6 years old, Jazz Jennings and his family began appearing on TV to speak about the challenges of growing up transgender. At the age of 6. In 2007, Jennings' parents founded Trans Kids Purple Rainbow Foundation to assist transgender youth. In 2011, I Am Jazz, a family in transition, a documentary about Jazz Jennings' life and family premiered on the Oprah Winfrey Network. And so the media really started pushing this garbage. 2010, 2011. At this point, Jazz Jennings is...
Let's see what that looks like.
This season on I Am Jazz. 2 years ago, I was on my way to one of the greatest institutions in the world, but I was actually struggling severely with mental health issues.
All right, once it zeros.
I started binge eating and I gained weight and more weight and more weight. And now, almost 100 pounds heavier, here I am today.
Hey,
what's up?
How are you?
This is my first formal date with a trans woman.
I can totally see why this show would absolutely enrage the right. It's got everything you need, you know? If you were to build something in a lab that would piss off Ben Shapiro, this is like if you use an AI generated prompt to create something sophisticated enough that came out looking like this, being like, piss off Ben Shapiro, this is pretty much the exact combination you'd need.
Sandra went ice skating the other day with Hope, this beautiful trans woman. Sandra, he gets along very well with transgender women. His dear, dear friend, Miss Peppermint. I just wonder if they've dabbled in the...
Man, I kind of want to watch this. I like the idea of the well-to-do white liberals kind of being like, ooh, are we going to be progressive enough? What does Grandma have to say? We know you got some thoughts, Grandma. And it's just like, oh, God. No, you don't want to hear what I have to say about this one. Let me say.
If I can't have sex with the person, could I see myself with someone who's not received her bottom surgery yet? I'm not sure.
How much butter did you put on the pasta?
Put 1 tablespoon.
Guys, wait. No, that's not 1 tablespoon.
I do experience fat shaming from my family. It makes me feel really humiliated.
That gives me PTSD from the fat shaming from the family. Like, I'll tell you this, as someone who used to be fat in high school, and then, you know, my mom put me on like a lot of regimented, like, hey, if you want to lose weight, you got to exercise, you got to eat right, blah, blah, blah. It's pretty nuts how, like, the rest of the family, even the well-to-do ones, will say things constantly to you, like, whoa, you look really good. You look like you've lost a lot of weight. Yeah, good for you. Good for you. And they're not saying that to be mean. They're actually saying that to be complimentary, right? But it's just kind of, it's so interesting that that's just like the filter through which like everyone sees everything. Like, oh, you inherently have more value just as a person because you know, obviously you've lost some of that weight. So yes, you're more valuable now, and that's good for you. You know, is basically what you're saying. So I completely understand why. Yeah, Ben Shapiro's like, what?
10 or 11 years old. This is the active torture of a child. And predictably speaking, Jazz Jennings is having some real life difficulties. That is not a shock, and it should not be a shock to anyone. But this was trotted out as the new model for American happiness and identity by the entire media for a decade. And I want to trace for just a moment the actual transformation of the story about Jazz Jennings and the overt blind willingness of the media to ignore the real problems in this person's life in order to maintain a false narrative. So this is the very first episode of I Am Jazz, season 1, episode 1. This is the kind of stuff that Hakeem Jeffries would love your kids to be taught in public school. And Jazz Jennings has written a bunch of children's books that are now being mainstreamed into public schools. This is season 1, episode 1 of I Am Jazz. This show premiered originally in, I believe, 2014. So at this point, Jazz Jennings was 13 to 14 years old.
I am a teenage girl. I'm also a soccer player. I'm also an artist. I'd like to think I'm funny. I love hanging out with my friends. I'm also transgender, and I'm proud of that. But you know, in the end, all these things come together and really just make me Jazz. So,
you know what's wild is like, if you take a step back, it's like a lot of this seems so extreme to me, just like the level of stuff that comes out of Shapiro, Walsh, Knowles, like that corner of the internet, just nonstop. It's either some of the most intense transphobia you'd ever think to experience in your lifetime being said on like a major platform, YouTube being like, yeah, here, algorithm, we'll bump that one up. Or just, you know, the weird things like how Matt Walsh will say the most racist possible stuff against indigenous people. No one cares. He'll be like, oh, that's a good thing that we basically brutalized all those savages because now they understand that they have NyQuil and their lives are better. It's good that we colonized them. In fact, the genocide was very appropriate. And you're just like, what the fuck? But like, I guess this must be how it's always felt. Like in different periods, like yeah, there's a lot more say women's rights than there was in the 1950s, for example. And then you see the propaganda that came out of that period. And you're like, whoa, yikes, that's so wild. I can't believe that kind of stuff existed. And then I expect us to be so much further in today's day and age. But like a lot of this shit is still just like bigots profiting off being bigots and making people like what is offensive about this in any way, shape? If someone is like, hi, I'm a young teenage girl, I enjoy sports, I like to do well in academia, I like hanging out with my friends, and I'm proud of the fact that I also happen to be trans. And then to see that and be like, what? Oh my god, this is literal torture.
I am Jazz.
This is the individual identity pushed by this person's parents. This is a boy who was given hormones, obviously, because now this person looks like a young pubescent girl.
You're so weird.
This person was given hormones
all
by
of you are
his
so
parents.
weird.
And then the media champion.
It never stops. Have you seen the saga of the labia lady? Who was just like, now because there was some display where a whole bunch of women had like, you know, molds made out of their body parts, she's like trying to tell which ones are distinctly trans women with bottom surgery and which ones are real labias, and just like circling the ones that are real and not. And then someone like popped in there who was a sex worker and was just straight up like, hey, this is fucked and you should stop. And she was like, well, how'd you know if yours is in there? She's like, it could be, you can see what my pussy looks like anytime you want. Go to my website, subscribe to my OnlyFans. What is wrong with you? Not your pussy. I guarantee you this is the wrong pussy. And then like became obviously one of the funny main characters of the internet for a little while. This morning, someone found, and then obviously I quote tweeted it because I was like, oh my god, that she's since deleted the tweet, by the way. I can't even pull the tweet up. She's got a story where she talks about trying to find the G-spot on a content warning, by the way. This is gross. Find the G-spot on a fucking corpse. And her father's in the room. She's like, I was mortified because my dad was in the room while I was fingering this corpse. And you're like, what the fuck? What? How does this always happen? There's someone who becomes the new main character of the internet, and within 24 hours, the most fucked up shit, like, it's like that queen of the Karens, the Bethany Mandel, who just like, as soon as Bethany Mandel couldn't define the word woke, the word she, you know, partially wrote a book on, everyone just started looking through her Twitter account, and it was just like, oh, you may have killed your moms. That's why did you tweet this out? I mean, it's bad enough that you did this, but then to be like, pulled the cord on my mom yesterday, not entirely sure if she could have lived longer. Not gonna find out either way. You're like, wait, are you going off about how you killed your mom? Okay, all right, go on.
Led by people like Barbara Walters.
Yeah, the Mandela effect. Maybe that's what we should call it.
2020, Barbara Walters gushing over the idea that a boy can become a girl. And this is the elites in our society that have decided to run a moral system that is directly...
By the way, this is all so backwards. Like, when you listen to the parents of trans children and listen to their stories, almost universally, they are the ones pushing back against their trans kids for a very long time. They're not the ones indoctrinating their kids. They're not seeing an Instagram or a TikTok and be like, oh, my kid could be popular. They'll get the likes. Here, why don't you try being a girl from now on? You know, you like being a girl, don't you, boy? Like, no. It's parents who reluctantly are like, they kept telling me that something was wrong. We couldn't figure it out. I kept telling them they're just a tomboy. I kept telling them, oh, you don't understand, you just like wearing boys' clothes, that's not what's going on here, no, please, blah blah blah. And they kept telling me, and then I saw them start to disassociate and become more depressed, and they wouldn't eat, and they weren't the same person, and all the joy like left their eyes. I could see that, and I was just so scared. and I didn't want to lose my kid. So what did I do? We eventually, we were beside ourselves. We went to go see a psychiatrist. We started, you know, getting counseling and counsel sessions. And then once we realized what was going on, we learned so much. We had to do so much reading, and I wanted to have an alive boy rather than I wanted a dead girl. That was the moment for me, the twist that changed my entire perception of this. And this is my story. And when you listen to that, of course, it's heartbreaking. Of course, it like fills you with both a deep sadness and sorrow, and then eventual joy, because the stories are remarkable. Where it's like, yes, and then my kid started to be happy and started to play with their friends again, and we used he/him pronouns, and now he's the happiest little boy in school, and it's like that's the story, you know, and that's why there is such high rates of less than 5% of people regret this. More people regret their cosmetic surgeries if they're cis teenagers than the people who are experiencing them if they're trans teenagers. Shouldn't this be telling you something? And again, this happens to so few people. This is like yearly in America, there's like 250 average mastectomies being done on young trans teenagers. They're freaking out over that and less than 5% regret rate. Like, leave them alone. What's wrong with all of you? Like, if you need a cause, you can go after cosmetic surgeries for teenagers, because then, again, we're talking 230,000, 250,000. That's a lot more, much bigger, like, if this is your cause, go after that. Or go after circumcision. If this is something being done without the consent of young men to over half the population, that's something that you can go at. You can use this as your cause. That's a lot of circumcisions.
Counter to all human knowledge for all of human history in order to, again, promote an individualistic idea of self that runs counter to pretty much all possibility of true human fulfillment.
They are the words that any parent would want to hear about their daughter. She is such a remarkable little girl. For a girl named Jazz, the word...
You know what's wild, though, is that the right, they've bought so far into this that now we're in this period where there's kind of this like paradigm shift that's happening very rapidly, and you're seeing normies start to wake up to a lot of the stuff. I don't know about all y'all, but I've certainly had people come out and say, hey, by the way, I was watching the show and there happened to be a trans person in it, and I've come to realize that trans people might not be as scary as I was led to believe. You know, you're seeing a little bit of that. You're also seeing a lot of rallies where love is outnumbering hate, and the more that love outnumbers hate, the angrier fascists are going to get, and the more extreme their rhetoric is going to get. So a lot of them now are getting into this really awkward position where they have to actually address some of the concerns that people are bringing up, such as, this does seem like a strange obsession you all have, right? Because again, like, if you actually genuinely cared about the things you care about, wouldn't you go after a lot of these other things? Like, I could risk getting my channel roasted, but I think it's important. Maybe I'll do a TOS before your very eyes right now. Maybe I won't. We'll see. It is TOS. It's definitely TOS. Okay. Yeah, I won't show you the actual act itself, even though if you were someone to watch the ECW, you would be able to see what it is. I will describe it for you, though, so obviously content warning. So someone who is a part of Turning Point USA, Chris DeJoseph. Chris DeJoseph is a creative director and productions at Turning Point USA. Chris has spent nearly 2 decades in television production, working on award-winning shows airing on CBS, Fox, NBC, Universal, and Discovery networks. Chris's credits include supervising producer and executive producer on many major networks, scripted and reality television series. After spending 18 years in liberal Hollywood, Chris wanted to use his talents and experience to join the conservative movement to promote conservative values and help win the culture war. Now, I'm not a big wrestling fan, as I'm sure some of you know, but I'm not against it. If you are a huge wrestling fan, I was just not someone who grew up loving wrestling. But I will describe what maybe I'll show. Let's wait till. Can I cut half of it off? Yeah, okay, so I'll put it from the below area. So I'll keep it TOS, okay? But obviously content warning because there is some male nudity. So he was performing an act in which he is completely in nothing but a thong, wearing nothing but a thong, jerking a man's pole vigorously up and down while the man spews foam onto the crowd, and both of them are making grunting noises while they're doing it. Now, an act which I think is very, very, very extreme, one that's probably not the most appropriate thing for children to be watching. But again, this is the same guy who's working for Turning Point USA, who's on a regular basis doing the whole drag queen or groomers narrative, pushing all this kind of shit. Do they actually care about exposing children to these acts? Like, every time I've done this genre, where I post like a fake version of something where it's like breaking, and then it'll say like breaking, and then I post like pictures of characters from wrestling matches who are dressed in like straight kink, or parents taking their children to the tilted kilt, or the fact that the tilted kilt has a children's menu. That part is pretty fucked up as well. And then showing people what they look like at the tilted kilt. It's women who are dressed incredibly provocatively, pretty much indistinguishable from what I would consider to be a strip act, and taking their kids, and it's totally fine. Just wholesome family entertainment. It's always just wholesome family entertainment in one direction, and in the other direction, it's pedophilia. It's the same thing with like the giant what is it, prosthetic breasts teacher who turned out to be doing it as an act. In one hand, it was a trans person who was endangering children, and they had to be removed from that school. And then as soon as everyone found out that the whole thing was actually a troll job, suddenly it's a hero. Oh, okay, well that guy's a fucking legend. Yeah, no, he's a legend. He's just doing this to mock how ridiculous things have gotten. And it's like, well, yeah, but he was still doing exactly what you were upset about him doing. He was still wearing the giant prosthetic breasts in front of kids in the classroom. That's still something that happened. It's like, yeah, but that he's not sexualizing it. He's not doing it because he's a sexual deviant. He's doing it to bring attention to how bad things have gotten. So in that case, it's fine. In the other case, yes, because obviously if a trans person was doing it, it would only be to sexualize and go after kids. So in one case, hero, other case, pedophile, you know?
Remarkable doesn't begin to cover it. At just 11 years old, she has taken what most children and their families would regard as a terrible secret and brought it smashing into the open. She is the brave and beautiful new face of a child born in the wrong body. When we first met Jazz in 2007...
You know what's so wild too is Ben Shapiro wouldn't do these kind of segments for anything other, like if there was another children's special where it's like, this child was born with cerebral palsy, but now we're going to see the brave story of how she has managed to work through many difficulties and challenges in life. And here's the story. Like, do you know how utterly fucked up it would be if Ben Shapiro at that moment decided, hey, this seems like an appropriate time to talk about how this entire industry is just trying to profit off this person's disease, and that they actually have a delusion, and that this is actually an ideological lobbying job or something like that. Of course you wouldn't. You'd be like, what the fuck? Thank you for the raid, Vitingale. Can everyone go to twitch.tv/Vitingale and give a follow back?
She was only 6 years old, and one of the youngest documented cases of an early transition
That's so nice
from
of you.
male to female.
We'll say things like, God made you special, because there aren't very many little girls out there that have a penis.
At age 5, her parents, Jeanette and Greg, made an extraordinary decision.
He's actually doing that thing where he's like, horrifying. Do you see how far it's gone?
They allowed Jazz to openly identify in the opposite gender.
Did they allow Jazz to openly identify, or did they push Jazz to openly identify in that direction because Jazz was a small child? A very
Yeah, like in what world is it parents who are suddenly doing this thing in order to get the social media clout they themselves want? Yeah, I really wanted to be a TikTok star, and I knew the best course to do that would be have a trans kid. So yeah, I forced my kid to transition against their will. Definitely wasn't in the opposite direction, and them asking me frequently, hey, by the way, this is something, and me not believing them for a very long time, and me pushing up against it.
very, very small child. All of this is incredibly disturbing. Thinking about disturbing things.
He's the master of such terrible segues into his ads. He'll always be talking like it's outright bigotry, right? Hey, these companies, they're fine with it. They're willing to pay for this. It'll be like him spewing the most anti-LGBTQ plus shit you ever heard, and then right afterwards being like, and that's why Harry Styles is a pedophile. Speaking of pedophiles, if you like socks that are smaller and intended for kids, but want socks that are that small but fit on your feet, then you should try super socks. You know, and you're just like, what the hell?
They're So again, that was about 2013, that Barbara Walters special, and it featured footage from like 2006. This is now season 7. This is now 2021. Here's the season 7 trailer.
This season on I'm Jazz.
Oh, I didn't know this was coming up. We watched this whole trailer already. Oh, do we get to see you be disgusted? Now there's too many things. He's not even disgusted anymore. He's like, this is soul crushing at this point. I told you, if you wanted to manufacture a trailer in a lab that would piss off or scare Ben Shapiro, this one had everything. It had everything from like, you know, people with difficulties with body imagery and stuff like that, all the way to a cis guy talking about dating trans women.
Okay, so obviously things are going.
Did we get to that part? I wanted to see him, because that's the part I think he'd truly melt down at.
And I really want to have that clarity. I really want to understand myself and be able to read my own soul and what I want. And it's just very challenging. And I think I'm kind of breaking down a little bit and spiraling into negativity.
I just want to feel like myself.
This is incredibly
Like,
sad.
I
It's
don't
incredibly
care,
sad stuff.
All I
You know
wanna
where this
see
incredibly sad stuff came from?
Me, and I don't feel like me ever.
He's gonna say
All I
it.
want to feel is like me and happy. This is incredibly sad stuff. You know why this incredibly sad stuff happened? Well, we have one more clip from I Am Jazz. This is of Jazz's mom. Jazz's mom talking about the wonders of transgender operations and surgery and what it takes to maintain transgender operations. You know, the part that you're not supposed to talk about out loud, but ended up on TV. Anyway, here's Jazz Jennings, the ideal mom.
The dude's a sociopath? Well, I don't understand why, in what world do you see someone talking about, hey, I'm having a lot of struggles with my weight, something that I can identify with. I had a lot of struggles with my weight when I was in high school as well, and having an honest discussion about that, and how that's leading to depression, how it's leading to members of the family causing undue stress, shit like that. And then for him to be like, well, you see what this is, clearly. In both cases, it's someone dissatisfied with their body image, right? And so we can directly correlate these two problems as being the exact same now.
Making, as Barbara Waltz said, the brave decision, the very brave decision to transition children when they are very young.
What do these have to do with each other? These are totally separate topics.
Explaining what Jazz Jennings' mom had to do to maintain a neo-vagina for her son.
But with her, I'm worried about like her mental well-being.
Did your staff find the clip that was like recorded by a cell phone? This is someone recording TV with their cell phone. You're no longer just going straight from the source.
And her dilation. The minute she leaves my house, we have a dilation problem.
That is a concern. When you don't have that watchful eye, they tend to go back to old patterns.
I have woken Jazz out of a dead sleep and taken the dilator and put the lubrication on it and said, here, you take this and you put it in your vagina. If not, I will. But Jazz is bad, even when I'm home once a day. I would be so mad if she goes away to college and that thing seals up. I will wring her neck. Can you imagine? No, I can't.
That thing that would be sealing up, that would be the fake body cavity created by the attempt to remove the penis and testicles.
You're so weird. Do none of you see this? I have to debate right-wingers on these issues, and they'll talk about prostates. Dylan Mulvaney was born with a prostate, and still has a prostate, most likely. Therefore, Dylan Mulvaney is not a woman. And you're like, do you understand how weird you sound? Why are you focusing on strangers' prostates? Do you need to inspect prostates before people play sports? Is that what you're talking? Like, what is going on here? You're more than the sum total of your prostate, my dudes. What is going on?
And reverse it into the male body. Just wonderful. This is what has to be taught to your kids. This is how Hakeem Jeffrey says,
You lied about what that clip was about, Ben. That wasn't about her talking about how she was getting bottom surgery for her child. That was her talking about what dealing with a child who had bottom surgery is like.
The harm of teaching this stuff to your kids. Why not teach kids that boys can become... We won't teach this part. This part's a little awkward. But why not? If you tried not to teach... If you don't want your kids taught this stuff, it's because you are a fascist. It's because you as a parent have no role in this system. Alrighty, guys, the rest of the show is continuing right now. You're not going to want to miss it. We'll be joined.
Oh, then you get the exclusive members only, where they will truly learn all of the things. Well, that was terrible. Ben Shapiro is a bigot and a transphobe of the highest order, and doesn't cease to be. That's all I can really take from that. What is the point? I don't know what the point is. The point is hate. No one can be happy. No one can both be trans and happy in Ben's eyes. I think that's the point.
Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form. Available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Juste, we shall spend many a generations building mighty cathedrals in your honor. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your oafish jesters, here to offer you a laugh at any opportunity. To our brave knights of the Round Table, Rachel K., Izzy Solidarity, Victoria Bell, Sebastian Demmel, Mark Harmon, Benji Arney, Scary Earth Human, Tony, DM Rivera, Resident Scarecrow, Sir Nickus, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruby Kelly, Brandon, Words Greenwood, Everything Important, Hegbert Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Doug Cady, Daniel Sutton, Jenna Tao, Dark Puppy, Quiet One 85, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, Multimondi, Trevbot EXE, Brian Ephraim, Anthropophojack, Catherine, Ramon Acosta, Incosin, Ralph Parler, Violent Orchard, Political Puppy, La Media Panza, Todd Buckingham, and Todd La Jeunesse. We salute our valiant heroes off to fight injustice everywhere.